All right, I think it's time we can officially start. Welcome everyone to our webinar on how to facilitate collaboration in a remote setting. Um, my name is Bastian. I'm also going to introduce myself in a second, but first, let's take a look at the agenda for today. So after a short introduction, we will take a look into what are good habits in a remote setting? How can I facilitate collaboration with my manager, my team, my coworkers, and so on? And then we will go on looking at a very central question, I think, about how to give feedback or not to give feedback, especially in a remote setup. And at the end, of course, there's time for any kind of questions you might want to ask. Um, and I first want to say thank you and get well soon to Carolyn. Originally, she should have done this introduction. Carolyn is our talent experience manager at WorkMotion. She takes care of all the talents hired through WorkMotion to make sure you have the best experience with us. Unfortunately, she got sick. So that's why I basically also introduced myself. I wish Carolyn, maybe she's listening to this recording, all the best and that you will come back soon. A little bit about myself. So that's me. You have already seen me here. I'm the VP Product and Marketing here at WorkMotion. A little fact about myself. I now lead teams in the B2B SaaS world for almost 10 years. And I'm a real remote work enthusiast. I don't know about you, but for me, remote work really started off when the pandemic hit and I was forced the first time to work remotely. But by now, I'm working for a fully remotely distributed company, WorkMotion. And I have to say, I wouldn't want to have it another way anymore. So I really believe in remote work. I think it can facilitate not only productivity, but also just lead to just a much better work-life balance and a higher satisfaction on all sides, employers as well as employees. And fun fact, I love every content around llamas. So if whenever I see something like I really can that's my cat videos, right? Llamas are my cat videos, I think. So, but that's just like a little fun note on the side. Let's kick it off, right? Quickly, just like this is again to set the stage a little bit. The goal of this webinar, right, is like to share some experience I have as a leader in a remote setup for a long time. Can share a lot with you what I have experienced works very well, what doesn't work so well, and hopefully with that make it easier. And you walk out of here with a few tips you can use in your own company and in your daily work. Today is not about like operational issues or anything you need help from us with. I would also be the completely wrong person to talk about this. If you have any specific operational request in regards to your employment through WorkMotion, please use the support portal and hand in a ticket, and it will be taken care of right away. All right, let's get started. Good habits in a remote work environment. Like maybe I see some people here also, maybe you can post in the chat a little bit like, since when are you working in a remote work environment? Would be interesting for me because I think it's a lot different talking to people that have done this for years and years and years and people that are very new to this. So if you want, just post how many years, months have you been working fully in a remote setup. First point for me, and one of the most important ones that I want to mention, is remote work somehow has a reputation of disconnecting people because suddenly we are talking to one and each other and have a screen in front of us. And while this might be, of course, a first little hurdle we have to jump over, I think there are very, very nice ways to stay connected with your colleagues. Some of them might become your friends in the remote work. One of the most prominent examples I can recommend is do some remote coffee chats. I have observed that in a lot of remote companies, these casual interactions of meeting someone in the coffee corner are a bit neglected. And That doesn't have to be this way. There are several tools out there. For example, we use one at WorkMotion that's called Donut, but I don't want to make some advertisement here. There are many of those tools out there that help you to randomly connect you to other people around the company. And I do this regularly. I do this every week, right? The tool randomly draws one person at WorkMotion to have a coffee chat with. I have to say, these are often like the most enjoyable 15 minutes of my week, just meeting someone, talking about non-work related stuff and exchanging with people from teams you wouldn't usually talk to. I really enjoy that. And I think it's an important thing we can use in the remote work to stay connected. Also meet people outside your own team, just in general, right? Like try to make it a habit. The remote coffee chats are one of these ways. Another thing that has become like very successful for us is starting a water cooler channel, maybe inside your team, maybe across teams, but don't just like we use Slack, right? I don't know how about you. You might use Teams or other tools, but often these channels, they are very much focused 100% on professional work. Doesn't have to be this way. Like having a conversation about some topics you might be interested in, music or movies or anything else, can be a great thing, and it should happen in every company. It doesn't mean just because we are working remotely we cannot have that. A water cooler channel is really a great idea. Maybe think about starting one if you don't have that already in your company. Also, do something fun together after work. Just recently, my team and myself, we met just digitally to play some nice games. Like one of the most recent recommendations I can give is a game where you have to generate memes. You're just like randomly getting memes that you can fill with text, and then later on you vote on what was the most funny one. I enjoyed this so much, and I think just because we're working remotely doesn't mean we can meet up later on, right? Do this. It's very important. And potentially think about meet with other colleagues that live near you in real life. We do this regularly. WorkMotion employees are distributed across more than 40 countries. And whenever I am in one of those countries, I'm checking who's living there, right? And I meet up with people, and it's so enjoyable meeting people and like suddenly having this connection. I think one of the big benefits of remote work also, right? Just like having this connection in the world with other colleagues of yours that you might meet. And yeah, please keep that in mind. Staying connected is a very, very important element of facilitating remote work collaboration. I told you already we use Slack, and now my examples are very like targeted towards Slack, but basically I want to talk about the technology we are using and the advantages they're having. In the past, we had to meet in a meeting room. We wrote a lot of emails. Maybe some of you even did a lot of phone calls. I did at the beginning of my career as well. We have now tools like Slack or Teams or others that bring us certain advantages, and I want to highlight some of them. You can, for example, organize messages quite nicely. Like we have a rule that whenever you answer on something on Slack, you should do that in a thread, because this is like a very nice way of keeping discussions easily to look at and to find them later, and not have like those huge chains of information that it's very hard to dissect which is the right information in there for me. Have a clear channel structure, right? Like it should be very easy to find the right channel to talk to people. Think about the naming of those channels. Sometimes I see channels that are very hard to identify on what are they there for, and where should I post. And also make sure there is some directory on, like, for example, your Teams Confluence page on like which channels should be used to reach out to you. Reduce the number of channels is always a recommendation I would give. Like what I do regularly is just like once a month go through all the channel history, see which of them are still valid or not. Make sure you're not overcrowding your communication tools with too many channels. This will very heavily influence the way you can focus and how you can find later on the important information. Also, like use the add function that is in Slack. I'm not sure how it works in Teams actually, but like how you make people aware of what is going on. The add function is a great one, but also be careful with it, because if you just add like a huge amount of people at the same time, you're distracting a lot of people at the same time. So use the add function in the right moment. Always think about, like, I mean, putting the add on such messages means something is popping up for someone, right? So it's like a tap on the shoulder. Imagine you're tapped on the shoulder the whole day. This will distract you. This will make you very unproductive. Think about, is this the right person? Is it right to now add this person? Or should I maybe not add the person? I can also just mention the name of the person. That's like a very important thing. I think here, the benefits of this functionality that technology suddenly gives us, as well as the potential dangers, are have to outweigh themselves, right? And you have to find the right balance. Also, I mean, this communication tool is great in general because you can also say, no, I'm just now focused on work. This is, for example, like something I hated in the office setting when I was in deep work and just someone talked to me. This is terrible, right? Same goes for your Slack, Teams, whatever. Make sure if you're in deep work that you turn off your notifications. This will make you so much more productive. And recommendation here, make it clear through your status, right? I think I also have a point about statuses in here. Yes, your status can give a lot of information. Just show it to others. Say, hey, sorry, I'm deeply focused on something. I will come back to you at 12, for example. It's what I did. I just turned off my Slack notifications for this webinar because I want to make sure you have my full attention. Use things like the huddle feature. I think the huddle feature is a great one because you can so easily reach out to others. It's something that we do, for example, a lot. It's so much easier than setting up a meeting. It's just a quick conversation. And we will come later on also to verbal and nonverbal communication. It's like, yeah, you can make sure your communication works much better. Also, use stuff like the reaction emojis. I know here in Livestorm there are also some reaction emojis, but you know them like from Slack, from Teams. In Google Meet, there are reaction emojis. I think this is a great way to show that you listen, that you respond, to see how you react to a message. Use this often. I think it's a great thing that we didn't have in the past and we can use now. Some best practices on video meetings, also based on experience. Headphones are a big topic. You see me not wearing headphones today. I have some, but I also sometimes struggle with them. It's really hard to find a reliable Bluetooth headphone. If I would do a webinar, I would never use Bluetooth headphones because I want to be 100% sure you can hear me well. Sometimes if I'm sitting in a cafe and working from there, for example, of course, I wear my Bluetooth headphones. But if there is a very important meeting, I have Bluetooth headphones that I can wire as well. Sometimes I change to wiring just to make sure it really works. And if you have not a reliable Bluetooth headphone, I think that's really worth an investment in your productivity and also the productivity of others because they are influenced of how well they hear you. Also test the quality of your microphone. It's just sometimes it's hard to tell if it works nice or not. So easiest thing is ask the others. Can you hear me well? Very, very simple question, but I have been in meetings where people are very hard to understand and no one said anything. That's not good. Avoid using AirPods, please. I have seen this a few times. I don't use AirPods in general. If I would use them, I would use them for listening to music or stuff like this, but not in a remote work setup. They have the tendency to not work over a long time, and then always problems occur. And whenever someone is in a meeting, I see them wearing AirPods, I already know, oh no, this will at some point of time fail. I think this is not a suitable work technology, to be honest. It's more for your free time. Face the camera. I've seen this so often for people who are like using different screens. I love using different screens as well, but it's so strange if I do a webinar and sit now like this and talk to you. I mean, this is just a very, very strange way, right? If you have to look at me like this all the time. Face the camera. It's just an easy thing and like it transports your message much, much better. Mute yourself when you're joining a meeting or when you're not talking. Also, I mean, should be a standard rule, but I see so many people not doing it. Also remind others to do this, or just like at some point of time, I just started muting people actively. If I see, for example, there was background noise coming, it's sometimes easier than making them aware of this. Also think about the lighting and the background. I mean, to like here, like I think I also always try to make sure that like if you look at me, things around me look nice. If anyone here works, for example, in a customer-facing role, I would recommend this even more, because it's so important. Also, people not only look at you and how you look, but also at your background. Have this in mind, right? Like make sure your background looks pleasing to the eye of others. Now, I want to make a little detour, very small one, I promise, but a little bit about communication, okay? And because it's related to a lot of things, I will tell you about remote work collaboration and also feedback later on. Communication is a complicated process, and we will not go too deep, I promise, but it always involves a sender of an information and the receiver of an information. So what I'm showing here, by the way, like engineers will say, oh yeah, I know this model, right? It's the same in engineering. And like the sender and the receiver, they communicate through some form of channel. And interestingly, it's a message that a sender sends. It's some form of encoding, right? You have something in mind, what you want to say. You say it. And then on the receiver side, there's a process of decoding this message. And that's quite interesting because there's a lot of noise around this. And the feedback later on, if you look at that, what the receiver heard and what the sender said, these can be two completely different things. I don't know if there are a lot of German speakers in this group, but like if yes, you have to go later on to YouTube and watch the hard-boiled egg sketch from Loriot, one of the most famous German comedians of all times, because I think it's the best examples of how communication can go wrong and how the sender and the receiver talk about two completely different things. In the sketch, there is a couple who sits on the breakfast table, and the husband says, "The egg is hard-boiled." That's all he says. And then there is an exchange of information which shows clearly like what he's trying to bring across as a message and what his wife hears are completely different things. This goes on for like 2 minutes and ends in a huge fight where I think at the end, even one of them says, "I just want to kill you." Yeah, and this shows how difficult communication is. And it shows a very important fact. There is the sender's truth of a message and there's the receiver's truth of a message. And these can be different. These can be completely different. And you have to be aware of that. What you say might be heard differently on the other side. Now, communication also doesn't just consist of words. Look at this graph, because this graph shows a pie chart of what communication consists of. How much do you think of communication that we perceive is verbal communication? It's like 3 different parts of this pie chart that you could choose. If you think it's the smallest one, you're correct. 7% verbal, 38% voice and tone, and 55% of perceived communication is body language. What is this pie chart? Where does this come from? It's a famous study from the 70s, which looked at how listeners believe things they say based on the signals they get. Right? So it's a very specific setup. It's a very famous study, but you also have to be careful because it doesn't apply to everything and every scenario. But it's important to hear, right? To realize this. The words we say might not matter as much as the voice and the tone of how we say it, and the body language, what we represent. And this doesn't mean at all, and please be very, very careful with that words don't matter. This would be the completely wrong conclusion of this. But it shows you how important this is. And for me, this is like one of the most important things about remote work. If communication is so much influenced by non-verbal parts of our communication, then suddenly remote work has some additional challenges for us in place, right? Because we cannot do certain things suddenly. Our body language is harder to observe. Maybe we don't even see the person so often in general as usual. Voice and tone is a bit different, in front of a screen. And we do a lot of verbal communication, I think more and more, also, for example, through Slack, but we are not used to that. So it's something we have to be aware of. To give you an example about nonverbal elements of communication, look at this person. How does this person look to you? Maybe like you can throw out some adjectives, some descriptions in the chat. And yeah, would be interesting to know, like, how would you describe this person, and how would you trust anything this person says? And then look at this picture. How does your perception change of what you might hear from this person? The appearance of this person plays a huge role in that. And I think, like, this is one of the best examples I always show to salespeople, for example, right? Like, and that you have to make sure how you appear in front of potential prospects you're meeting. Often their opinion about you in their subconsciousness is made in the first 10 seconds that they see you, and it has nothing to do with what you say. It's about how you appear. And of course, appearance is not the only nonverbal communication element. There are much more. There are facial expressions, hand gestures, paralinguistics, like how do I speak, how to pronounce the words, how loud am I, and so on. The posture, the proxemics, like how close are you to someone else, which again in remote work doesn't work so well. The eye gaze, the haptics, the appearance, all of this plays together, and it leads to some specific learnings when we think about remote work. And I want to point you out especially one things that for me are one of the most important ones. I have seen this a lot. I have seen remote work Google meetings with people completely switching off their camera. I think this is really hindering collaboration. Why? Well, if you turn off your camera during the meeting, you're already sending a signal, right? Like, I mean, if I would turn off my camera right now, right, I also sent you some kind of a signal, right? Maybe I'm not that interested at all in all of this, or if you're showing your picture or not, right? This makes a difference. Also, suddenly, people cannot see you anymore. If people cannot see you anymore, they lose the element that they are used to as part of a communication. They cannot see you really. And you just saw 55% of the perceived communication is usually what they see in your body language. So like, you take this away, that's completely unwise to do. Also, if you also something I see people inside the meeting, like you start a meeting, it's 10 minutes inside the meeting, and then someone switches off their camera. What signal does this person send? I think it's a clear, like, if you just do this without any comment, it's just like, okay, this person obviously lost interest, or like, I don't know, is he even there anymore? Don't do that. If you need to switch off the camera, do it, right? I have 2 little kids that sometimes jump around at home, and then I see a need to switch off my camera to somehow handle the situation. But I write a quick it's a quick chat message into the video meeting, right? Saying I will switch off my camera because my kids are playing around here. Also think about if you write long written messages, is this really a good thing to do? A video message, a voice message, gives you an additional element of your communication that makes sure that what you send as an information is the same information the person receives. I always recommend, don't write huge text messages on Slack or emails or anything. If this is something that requires more explanation, send a voice message, send a video message. And if you do send a video message, show your face. Like Vidyard or Loom or whatever you might be using has always the feature to like show your face while you're sharing your screen and explaining what you're doing. Use that. It's very, very helpful. It lowers the chance that you are misunderstood. And at the end, collaboration is so much correlated with the success of communication. And that's why I'm so heavy on this topic and really want to give you there some good tips and guidance. Then I want to quickly talk a bit about the power of async work. Async work is great. We couldn't do that before, and we can now. Like at WorkMotion, we have flexible working times. I hope in your company as well when it comes to remote work. Even if there are not flexible times, it still doesn't always have to be a meeting where you discuss things. Like if you take one thing away from today, go back to your team and think about, does this really have to be a meeting? We regularly do this as well. In my opinion, there should only be a meeting if it's either like a brainstorming, like a creative session where you like ignite others and you try to bring new ideas up. If it's a meeting about a decision to be made, or if it's like a feedback talk, for example. If this is the case, do a meeting. That's great. If you just come together to share information, don't do a meeting. This is completely unnecessary. If I want to share information, I can use a video message, for example, or I can write a quick summary. It's not necessary to meet in a room, especially in a remote setup, to do these kind of things. Just share it with other people. And the video message especially is one of my favorite things in async work. Also document just the things you do quite nicely. If they're easy accessible, then again, you lower the necessity of any kind of meetings. And like, I mean, I talked about connection earlier. I would rather invest the time of having a coffee chat with someone, right? And just like sitting somewhere where I listen to someone just sharing some information, which could have been a Slack message, a Vidyard video, or an email. Also, if you're not sure about what a meeting is about, don't go to that meeting. I mean, now I also like, at least that's my policy for my teams. You should align with your team lead on that. But I always, like, my team members always have my full support if there's no clear agenda and not a clear reason on why this meeting should happen. It's completely okay to reject the meeting invite, no matter who invited you. Also, optimize your team task management. I think there's always a lot that you can do there, because it's also an easier overview. And if everyone knows what the other people in the team are working on, async work really becomes more and more powerful. And last but not least, meeting notes are your best friends. And I have some good tips on meeting notes as well, because I think they're so essential in what we do. So first thing, please always do meeting notes. It's not that challenging if you don't have so many meetings, but you just heard me saying before, meetings are always about something important, a brainstorming, a decision to be made, or a feedback talk. So every meeting should have meeting notes. It's simple, isn't it? Like, it's like not a big revelation, but still, how many of your meetings have meeting notes? Define at the beginning of the meeting who is responsible for doing this. Something that's easily forgotten, and it's like, oh no, like we didn't define anyone who's doing notes. Just make it a habit. Make it a habit at the beginning to ask who can take some notes. Also send them around afterwards. And like in Google Calendar, for example, there's this nice function of just attaching the meeting notes to the calendar item. So you can always go back and see, what did we discuss at the time? Make the meeting notes clear and precise. I don't want to see like someone writing an essay and noting down every quote someone says. The meeting notes are a summary of the most essential points. Treat it like that. Also, highlight the decisions that have been made. Really, really important. And if there is a to-do, it has to be in the meeting notes. And what I see that then often there are to-dos in the meeting notes, but they're just standing there. It's like, I don't know, do some research on XYZ. Maybe even there is like then someone named, but often not. Or there are like two people named. This is completely wrong. A to-do in a meeting note should always have one responsible person and an expected due date that you agree on during the meeting. Until when do you think you can provide this? Without that, to-dos don't even make sense. And you make your meeting notes so much more powerful if this is clear. And then, of course, follow up on those taken notes. Like, for example, pull them up in the next meeting, but not only there, because then again, it's just about information sharing beforehand. Make sure who's like owning this and following up that everything is being pursued as agreed on. All right. So this ends my first part on how to facilitate collaboration. What are good habits? Now, second part of this webinar is about how to give feedback in a remote setting, or how not to give feedback in a remote setting. By the way, if you have questions at the end, we will have a big Q&A. Just as a reminder, you can ask any of your questions there. What is feedback? If you just look at what is the definition? Feedback, as a general definition, occurs when the environment around you reacts to an action or a behavior of yours. Okay, so it's first of all, it's a definition. It's just a reaction. If you ask about what I think feedback is, I would say feedback is a gift. For me, feedback really, really is a gift. Always. Any feedback. Every single feedback is a gift. Now, we have been taught somehow, or have this feeling, there's these two categories of feedback. There is this feedback, and then there is this feedback. Good and bad, right? If you ask someone what kind of feedback is, there's good feedback and bad feedback. That's not the definition of feedback. Feedback, if you look at this, how it is defined, is categorized in three different categories. There's appreciation. Appreciative feedback is if you see something, if you acknowledge someone, if you motivate and thank someone. That's appreciation feedback. Already as a recommendation, I can say, do this as often as possible. If you see something being done nicely, if someone helped you, do that. Show this appreciation, give appreciative feedback. We at WorkMotion, as a recommendation, also have a thank you channel where we can do that. It's one of the ways to do it. Then there's coaching feedback. Coaching feedback often happens between a direct manager and their team members. It's there to help the receiver of the feedback expand their knowledge or sharpen a certain skill, improve something, and basically teach and coach them, right, to become better. And then there is evaluative feedback. This is the one I think most people confuse also with bad feedback. Evaluative feedback is there to just say, okay, how does what you just do or how you behave rate against my own set of standards or the set of standards we have in the company? How does it align to my expectations? How, or how does it influence my decision making? That's evaluative feedback. Okay, and think about this always. There is really no bad feedback. These three are the categories of feedback that exist, one of them being evaluative feedback. So, well, if there is no feedback that is bad, why can feedback make us feel bad? It's very important to understand this, and especially for a remote setting, I think it's important to understand this. There are typically three feedback triggers that are pulled for someone who receives the feedback. There's the truth trigger, the relationship trigger, and an identity trigger. I will give you some examples on all of them. The truth trigger. The typical reaction you might be facing if a truth trigger is hit for yourself. You get the feedback and something happens in your head. Typically it is, oh no, this is wrong, or this is not helpful. Okay, very typical reaction. Every one of us has experienced this. So you just see that whatever the person, the sender of the feedback gives you seems not to be helpful. Maybe it's even untrue in your opinion. In this case, it's very, very important that first you say, okay, I need to sit back and understand, why is there someone sending me a feedback that is completely different from my own set of what I'm thinking? Why is it maybe just the message? Is it strangely coded and decoded, or is it just a completely different observation I'm not having for myself? Only way to handle this is ask questions. Why do you see it this way? Should be the first thing you'd be asking, and also ideally without getting emotional, right? It's just oh, that's strange. It's different from what I'm seeing. Can you explain me more about this? Can you give me some examples? Does it work still? Yeah. If a truth trigger is hit, it can also be that it hits on one of your blind spots. Every one of us has them, right? Because we are observing ourselves always from the inside. How we look at ourselves on the inside is quite different than how people observers from the outside. Many famous studies around that. So it can help you to identify a blind spot. Doesn't have to be this way. Could also just be that the giver of the feedback really has a strange observation that is not really representative to what you do or how you behave. So have a discussion. That's the main recommendation there. Second trigger that it's often pulled in terms of feedback is the relationship trigger. What you feel is typically, what? After all I've done for you? Or like, who are you telling me this? If you feel this inside yourself, be aware that here's a relationship trigger being pulled. What this person is giving you as a feedback has nothing to do with the actual words the person has been saying. It is all about the relationship you have with the sender of this information. And relationship is a part of communication. In this case, try to like calm down and separate the what from the who. Okay, it's like who gives you feedback plays a role, and it is some form of communication in itself. If some person gives you feedback that you think, why, like, this person shouldn't give me feedback, and that's a separate topic to look at and to try to find some improvement for this. Despite that, the person is giving you some feedback. So try to see, is there like something in that I can use to the positive, right? So separate the relationship from the message is very, very important. And also be aware you might be hitting those triggers. I'm now describing this always from the receiving end, but I'm doing this because I want you to make sure that you are aware that you might be pulling those triggers with others as well. The third trigger that's often pulled is the identity trigger. And the identity trigger leads to reaction like, oh God, am I bad at my job? Or, oh God, I fucked up. Sorry, square word, I screwed up. That's like the most typical thing. And a lot of people have this. I have this, right? It's like sometimes like, whoa, what did I do there, right? And this trigger, if it's pulled, it has nothing to do with the other person or anything. This is typically something that happens inside yourself and is all about your relationship with yourself. Okay. And there is no feedback in the world, in my opinion, that should lead to such kind of reaction. If you get this kind of feedback again and again and again and again and again and again, maybe then. But one feedback that just leads to this kind of reaction, this probably isn't really something that is rationally. So observe for yourself, how did I come to such an extreme reaction? Why does this feedback make me feel this way? And try to dismantle the distortions, right? So like the worst thing about feedback, and especially some feedback that pulls an identity trigger, is that you carry this a long time around with yourself. This is not good. Make sure you find your balance, right? You look at this message again. Also go back to like, what's the real essence of this for me to learn from? Remember, feedback is a gift, and think about when the first extreme reaction, which is this one here, is over, to say like, how can I grow from this? Right? At the end, someone just gifted me with sharing an outside perspective on how they perceive me. So what can I do to become better with this? And all of these triggers, they again come back to this model of the sender and receiver differences in how they hear messages. So be very, very aware not to accidentally pull triggers with others. Remember the two different truths. Think about how your message might be perceived. And I think there's a general rule in remote work that always says, like, try to over communicate. I think this is really, really good, because the more you communicate, especially in such feedback situations, how more concrete you make it with examples and so on, how you support it with having your camera on, showing your facial expressions and your body language, this all helps to make sure the feedback is perceived in the right way. So I also have some concrete do's and don'ts that I want to share with you. The do's of giving feedback: make sure to be specific. Feedback always involves a concrete example. It's not just like, oh, you always do this and this and that. That's not the way of giving feedback. Be specific. in this situation, I observed that you did this and this and this. This made me feel this and that way, or this is the reaction that happened on my side, and this is what I would wish it to be. Make sure that your feedback is timely. A feedback that you give a week after is much harder to give because you don't remember the situation as well. The receiver of the feedback doesn't remember the situation so well. Even worse, I see some managers sometimes waiting for a full feedback cycle and until they give feedback. No one remembers those situations anymore. You take away the chance to learn from it, and you increase the chance of pulling a certain trigger. Because my first reaction, honestly, would be, why have you been waiting all this time to give me that feedback? Do only give evaluative feedback in private. That's, I think, also a very, very important rule. You might be in a big Google Meet with a lot of participants. Stay back, and if you want to give evaluative feedback, maybe ask the person later on, can I have 5 minutes of your time to give you some feedback? It's never good to do this in a big round. Why? Because again, the relationship trigger is being pulled, right? The person might be asking, why are you asking me this in front of this whole big round? Like, you make me look stupid. You don't want that. Do give feedback in regards to everything we said about appreciative feedbacks. And there's this famous 5-to-1 rule that especially leadership people I want to remember. 5-to-1 rule means if you ask people how they remember certain feedbacks, the appreciative and feedback that they perceive as something positive is outweighed by the evaluative feedback that they perceived as something negatively for them. And usually on the average personal level, 5 appreciative positive feedbacks are equally perceived as 1 evaluative, rather negative feedback. That's so human. And it's so important to have this in your mind. That means even if you think hey, I gave 1 positive, 1 negative feedback, it's good, right? Here, sometimes good, sometimes. No, this is not how a person perceives it, right? If you say 5 positive things, the 1 evaluative feedback might be giving might be weighing the same weight. Do not target the behavior of do not target the person behind the behavior. Talk about the behavior itself. It's not about the person. And express your feelings, right? I'll also come up in a second about how you do this verbally the best way. Do it frequently, do it in small chunks, don't wait, don't stockpile, and give the recipient a chance to respond. Also very important, especially since we want to make sure that the feedback is perceived in the same way you intended it to be perceived. Also, I can only encourage you, especially in the remote setting, where we have less interactions, where we see people not that often, not that direct, where there is a screen in front of us, to embrace asking for feedback. That's good. That's good. A feedback is a gift you can get, and it's a gift you can ask for from others. The don'ts of giving feedback. Well, it's sometimes the reverse of what I just said, right? Do not give evaluative feedback in a group setting. I think I discussed this already, but I want to hit on that again. Also, some of you might have heard about the sandwich method, a very old-fashioned way of giving feedback, where you hide some evaluative feedback between 2 positive messages, some appreciation, then the thing you want to bring across, and again some appreciation to make please sure that the person on the other side is not feeling bad afterwards. That's not the right way. All you do is you don't transport the right message you want to transport in your evaluative feedback. And this doesn't help anyone. This doesn't help you. This doesn't help the person who receives the feedback. Do not exaggerate. Do not wait for a regular time to give feedback. Just do it, right? I mean, like I said, the huddle feature again, right, on Slack. Just say, can we please huddle quickly? I want to give you some feedback. Do not stockpile criticism. Do not just send a Slack message or an email. Now, this is, again, it's very focused on remote, as you see, right, on remote work. If you send a Slack message or an email with evaluative feedback, think about what communication consists of. It's only 7% verbal, usually. You take away all the other things that you could do to make sure that your feedback is perceived in the right way. Also, you observe the person if you're sitting in front of them and you see their reaction, their facial reaction to the message you bring across. You take away that chance if you send a Slack message or an email. For appreciative feedback, I don't mind, right? They're like the dangers of what can happen is not that big. There are no triggers to be pulled really. But for evaluative feedback, don't do that. Don't do it writtenly, especially not in a remote setup. Do not turn your camera off, and do not make absolute statements. Use iMessages. What is an iMessage? We will see in a second after I give you this last slide about receiving feedback. Receiving feedback means listen actively. Listen actively also means repeat what the person said, right? So like, I understand that you mean this and this and that. Is that right? Yeah? It's important. Might be that you just decoded the message in a different way. Be open. Like, embrace feedback, really. It's my big recommendation to you, and reflect on the message always. And even if there's a person sitting across from you who is completely untrained and very, very bad skilled at giving feedback, there is something that you can take out of that. I'm really believing in that. So ask questions about the feedback, follow up, really like take this also seriously, right? Try to make improvements if this is something that for you see, yes, maybe there is something behind that, and thank people for their feedback. It is a gift at the end. Say thank you. And always remember, body language, tone of voice, that often speaks louder than the words themselves. Use this very, very wisely. And my last point that I wanted to make, use the iMessages, right? You don't want to, especially since there can be different truths about like what is being sent as a message. There can be completely different perceptions of what you say. And if you make statements like, you do this and that, or it's always the case that that this happens when you do this and this and that, you make absolute statements. You make this sound as like the only truth. Make sure that you make clear that it's your truth that you're talking about, your observation and your feeling. And you do that by starting a sentence with an I. I have observed. I think that. I have noticed. For me, it seems like. This is the way you should introduce your feedback. No other way. Okay? And if you do that, then you really become a feedback champion. I'm convinced about that. And this will help the collaboration in your remote team so much. So I think with this was my last slide. I took a tiny bit longer than I intended, but we still would have 12 minutes of times for questions if there are any. I see so far one question in the chat, which is by Abraham. Will the slides be shared? I guess so. I actually, since Carolyn was the organizer, I don't know what exactly the plan was, but I mean, I'm happy to share those slides with you if you're interested in them, of course. Any other questions? How often should you share feedback? Thanks, Asta. Good question. I think like giving feedback, as I said, is like on an average doing not often enough. It's very rarely that I have observed anyone giving too much feedback. Okay. Probably there is too much feedback. There is something like that. I just don't observe it really, especially not in a remote work, right? So I would say, based on my experience, do it definitely more often, and always like remind you to do that, especially also the appreciative feedback, right? Just like, it's so easily forgotten. Celebrate the small wins on a daily basis. Giving an example from my team, we meet each day in a stand-up, but like one stand-up per week. At the end of the week, we always look at what went really well this week. What can we celebrate? What are we proud of? I think that's something very, very important. So yeah, do it as often as possible, I would say. It will be really hard to give too much feedback. Good. Currently, I don't see any further questions. I mean, yeah, we don't have to take the full time. I'm so pleased to see some of the Talents Heights WorkMotion here in this session. Maybe some watch it later on. I think the registration list was much longer than the people attending, so probably some people couldn't make it, and maybe they watched the recording right now. I hope you enjoyed this session. For me, it was really a pleasure to share some of my experience. We have also at WorkMotion. Our next webinar will be coming in April. Caroline is the master behind that and will inform you. And with this, I want to thank you. I wish you a great Friday and a wonderful weekend. Thanks a lot. Talk to you sometime in the future. Bye-bye.